My name is Alexandra, and at 33, I never expected to be sitting in my parents' living room feeling like I was in a business negotiation rather than a family gathering. As a financial advisor, I thought I understood everything about money and relationships. That was until my grandmother passed away last month, leaving me an inheritance that suddenly had everyone acting strange. When I got that text from my dad requesting a formal family meeting, my stomach dropped. Walking into their house that evening, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then my parents casually dropped the bomb about my inheritance money. Before I continue with my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and get ready for a wild ride about family, money, and the lengths I went to protect what was rightfully mine. My grandmother Martha was more than just family to me. She was my mentor, my confidant, and honestly, the person who shaped me into who I am today. From as far back as I can remember, our Sunday brunches were sacred. While other kids my age were watching cartoons, I was sitting across from Grandma Martha at her favorite diner, listening to her stories about growing up during tougher times and the financial wisdom she gained along the way. Martha had this way of explaining money that made sense even to a 7-year-old. She would portion her pancakes into sections, telling me, "This piece is for living, this one for saving, this one for giving, and this tiny piece is for enjoying today. This is how you build wealth, Alexandra. Not by having everything you want now, but by planning for tomorrow." Those lessons stuck with me. By the time I was 12, I had my own budgeting system. At 16, I opened my first investment account with money saved from babysitting. Martha would review my statements with pride gleaming in her eyes, never telling me what to do, but asking questions that guided me to make my own decisions. My brother Andrew, 3 years younger than me, had a completely different relationship with money. While I saved, he spent. While I planned, he lived in the moment. This stark difference became the defining characteristic of our sibling relationship. Our parents responded to this difference in troubling ways. When Andrew blew his allowance on comic books and candy before the week was half over, they would slip him extra. When he forgot to save for a school trip, they covered it. These weren't one-time occurrences, they were patterns. I remember when I was 17, I had been saving for 6 months to buy a laptop for college. The day I was going to purchase it, Andrew crashed his bike into Mrs. Peterson's garden gnomes while attempting a stunt. Rather than making him work to pay for the damages, my parents took money from my laptop fund, promising to pay me back. They never did. I worked an extra month at the local library to make up the difference. This dynamic continued into adulthood. I moved away to attend college on a partial scholarship, working part-time to cover the rest. Meanwhile, Andrew went to an expensive private university, failed most of his classes, and got bailed out by our parents each semester. I built my career in financial advising step by step, while Andrew bounced between jobs, always with some excuse about toxic workplaces or bosses who just didn't understand his potential. Despite all this, I maintained a relationship with my family. It wasn't perfect, but it was what I had. I would drive 2 hours to visit every other month, listen to my parents brag about Andrew's latest venture even though I knew it would likely fail, and bite my tongue when they asked if I could help him with his resume again. Grandma Martha was my sanctuary in these family dynamics. She saw through the patterns and encouraged me to set boundaries while still being compassionate. She always told me, "Family is important, Alexandra, but not at the expense of your own well-being." When Martha was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer last year, I was devastated. The 6 months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, late-night phone calls, and trying to make her comfortable. I took time off work to be with her in those final weeks, while Andrew visited only twice, both times asking her for money for a new food truck business idea he had. After she passed, the grief hit me in waves. I would be fine one moment, then find myself sobbing in the cereal aisle at the grocery store because I saw her favorite brand of oatmeal. Martha had told me she was leaving me something in her will, but we never discussed specifics. Money was never the foundation of our relationship, so I didn't ask for details. By this point in my life, I had built a solid career as a financial advisor. I had my own condo in the city, a healthy retirement account, and enough disposable income to travel when I wanted to. I wasn't rich by any means, but I was financially stable in a way that made me proud, especially before 40. Then came the text from my father, 3 weeks after Martha's funeral. "We need to have a family meeting this Friday. Please be at our house by 6. Important financial matters to discuss." The formality of it was strange. Our family didn't do meetings. We did chaotic holiday gatherings and occasional birthday dinners, but never meetings. Something felt off. The drive to my parents' suburban home that Friday evening gave me plenty of time to think. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the highway as I replayed my father's text in my mind. Important financial matters could mean anything, but combined with the formal tone and the timing after Grandma's death, my instincts told me this was about the inheritance. I pulled into the familiar driveway, noting that Andrew had already arrived. His new silver sports car looked jarringly out of place next to my practical sedan. For someone supposedly in financial trouble, he always managed to have nice things. I took a deep breath, grabbed the bottle of wine I had brought, and headed for the front door. Mom answered on the first knock, her smile a little too bright, her hug a little too tight. "Sweetheart, you're here. Come in, come in. Your father and Andrew are in the living room." The house smelled like Mom's lasagna, my favorite, which immediately struck me as suspicious. She only made that when she wanted something or was trying to soften a blow. Dad stood to greet me with an awkward handshake instead of his usual bear hug. "Evening, Alexandra. Glad you could make it on such short notice." Something in his businesslike tone sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't my dad, the high school history teacher who collected vintage records. This was someone else, someone who had an agenda. Andrew lounged on the couch, barely looking up from his phone. "Hey, sis," he muttered, his sleeve riding up to reveal a watch that I recognized as a luxury brand worth at least $5,000. I quickly calculated how many months of rent that could cover for someone supposedly drowning in debt. We made stilted small talk as Mom busied herself bringing out appetizers that were far fancier than our usual family gatherings. I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she arranged cheese and crackers on a platter I'd never seen before. She kept glancing at Dad, as if seeking reassurance. As I helped her bring drinks to the living room, I glimpsed a stack of papers on the dining table. The words "Last Will" and "Testament" were visible on the top sheet before Mom hurriedly covered them with a table runner. "What are those documents, Mom?" I asked casually. Her laugh was too high and too fast. "Oh, nothing important right now. Let's just enjoy some family time before dinner, shall we?" The evasion sent up another red flag. In that moment, memories of similar scenarios throughout my childhood came flooding back. The time Andrew crashed the family car and I wasn't allowed to use it for my job interview. The Christmas when my gift was a sweater while Andrew got a laptop for school. The way they remortgaged their house to fund Andrew's first failed startup but couldn't contribute to my college fund. We settled in the living room, an uncomfortable tableau of forced normalcy. Mom perched on the edge of her seat, Dad kept checking his watch, and Andrew scrolled through his phone, occasionally smirking at something on the screen. The tension was palpable. After what felt like an eternity of discussing weather and neighborhood gossip, Dad cleared his throat and sat up straighter. "Well, I think we've waited long enough. Let's get to the purpose of this meeting." The words hung in the air like a guillotine about to drop. Mom clutched her napkin so tightly her knuckles went white. Andrew finally put his phone down, suddenly interested in the conversation. As a financial advisor, I've sat across from clients having difficult money conversations hundreds of times. I'd recognize the signs anywhere: the nervous gestures, the rehearsed opening lines, the strategic seating arrangements. My parents had placed me in the hot seat, facing all three of them. This wasn't a family discussion. It was an ambush. Dad folded his hands on his knee, adopting what I recognized as his principal conference posture from parent-teacher meetings. Alexandra, you know that family is the most important thing in the world to your mother and me. We believe in supporting each other through thick and thin. The rehearsed quality of his words made my skin crawl. I nodded slowly, already bracing myself for whatever was coming next. Mom jumped in, eyes already glistening with tears she hadn't yet earned the right to shed. Your brother has been going through a really tough time lately. The economy is just so difficult for young entrepreneurs. I bit back a reminder that at 30, Andrew was hardly a youth victimized by economic forces, and that I worked in finance and understood the economy quite well. Instead, I simply asked, "What's going on?" Andrew heaved a dramatic sigh. His expression practiced remorse with just a hint of entitlement peeking through. "I made some investments that didn't pan out, and I've got some creditors breathing down my neck. Nothing I can't handle eventually, but it's pretty intense right now." Dad cut to the chase more directly than I expected. "We've been discussing the inheritance that Grandma Martha left you." The way he said you held a note of resentment, as if my grandmother loving me enough to leave me something was somehow an act of family betrayal. "Given Andrew's situation and the fact that you're doing so well financially," Dad continued, "we've decided that the most sensible course of action would be to use your inheritance to clear Andrew's debts." The casual way he dropped this bombshell, as if he were simply telling me they were changing the dinner menu, left me momentarily speechless. I maintained my composed exterior, a skill honed through years of client meetings during market downturns, but inside, a volcano of emotions erupted. They weren't asking. They had decided. About my inheritance. Without me. Mom must have mistaken my silence for consideration because she quickly added, "You always were the responsible one, sweetheart. You have your wonderful job and your condo. You don't really need this money the way Andrew does." The implication that my financial stability, the result of years of hard work and careful planning, somehow justified taking what was rightfully mine made my blood boil. But I kept my face neutral, deciding in that moment that gathering information was more important than expressing outrage. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, my voice steady. "Andrew's in debt for about $250,000, Dad said. I nearly choked. That was significantly more than I had expected, and knowing my grandmother, likely most, if not all, of what she had left me. "We already spoke to Martha's lawyer," Mom added, and her voice had the slightly guilty tone I recognized from childhood when Shed read my diary or gone through my drawers. "He said there might be some paperwork, but since you're family, it should be straightforward to redirect the funds." The realization that they'd gone behind my back to contact Grandma's lawyer before even speaking to me felt like a physical blow. But their statement contained a critical error that told me they didn't have the full picture, and I decided to let them continue digging their own hole. "Can you tell me more about these debts?" I asked Andrew directly. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly not having expected to be questioned. "Just business loans mostly, and some credit card stuff." Dad jumped in a little too quickly. Andrew's last restaurant venture had some unexpected challenges. The location wasn't ideal, and there were issues with the contractor. "But I heard through our cousin Sam that it was doing well before it closed," I said innocently. "I actually thought about investing in it myself at one point." Mom and Dad exchanged glances, while Andrew suddenly became very interested in his water glass. "Well, There were complications, Mom said vaguely. I pressed further. What kind of complications require $250,000 to fix? Andrew suddenly snapped. Why does it matter? The business failed, I have debts, and you're sitting on a pile of cash you didn't even earn. The least you could do is help family. The mask had slipped, revealing the true entitlement beneath. Mom's eyes widened in horror at his outburst, while Dad tried to smooth things over. What your brother means is that this is an opportunity for you to help someone you love through a difficult time, Dad said, his tone condescending, as if explaining something to a child. That's what family does. I nodded slowly, then asked a question I already suspected the answer to. Can I see a breakdown of these debts? If I'm considering helping, I'd like to know exactly what's involved. The panic that flashed across all three faces confirmed my suspicions. There was more to this story. Well, they're spread across different accounts, Andrew mumbled. I kept pushing, my financial advisor instincts kicking in. Are we talking business loans, personal loans, credit cards, what? Mom intervened, clearly trying to redirect. The details aren't really important, sweetie. The important thing is helping your brother get back on his feet. I remember what Grandma Martha always said about money troubles, I replied innocently. She said, the devil is in the details, and you can't fix what you can't face honestly. The mention of my grandmother caused Mom to flinch visibly. There was guilt there, which told me volumes. It's not all strictly business debt, Andrew finally admitted, a hint of defiance in his voice. I needed a place to live, so some of it is the down payment on my condo. And transportation for client meetings, so that's the car. The rest is, living expenses while I was building the business. Luxury condo. Sports car. Living expenses that apparently included a $5,000 watch. This wasn't debt from a failed business venture. This was lifestyle funding. Excuse me for a moment, I said, rising from my seat. I need to use the restroom. As I walked away, I heard Mom whisper frantically, Do you think she's going to agree? I needed a moment alone to process what was happening. As I locked the bathroom door behind me, I realized with painful clarity that my own parents saw my financial responsibility not as something to be proud of, but as an opportunity to exploit. I splashed cold water on my face in the bathroom, trying to calm the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. The mirror reflected back a woman who looked composed on the outside while crumbling within. I took several deep breaths, remembering the techniques my therapist had taught me for moments of crisis. Looking around the familiar bathroom, I noticed small signs of extravagance that hadn't been there during my last visit. A new marble countertop, designer hand towels, expensive soap in a crystal dispenser. Where was this money coming from if they were so concerned about Andrew's debts? I decided to take a calculated risk. Instead of returning immediately to the living room, I quietly slipped down the hall toward my father's home office. The door was ajar, and I could hear the murmur of my family still discussing in the living room. The office was meticulously organized as always, but a folder left conspicuously on the desk caught my attention. Andrew's Finances was written in my father's precise handwriting. My heart pounding, I quickly flipped it open. What I found confirmed my worst suspicions. This wasn't the first time they'd bailed Andrew out. There were records of previous loans totaling over $100,000 in the past 5 years alone. None had been repaid. There were also printed screenshots of Andrew's social media posts showing lavish vacations in Bali and Switzerland that mysteriously coincided with when he claimed to be working tirelessly on his failed business. Most damning of all was a printed email from Andrew's ex-girlfriend, Sarah, dated 6 months ago, warning my parents that Andrew had a gambling problem and had borrowed money from some dangerous people. They had apparently ignored her concerns completely. I quickly took photos of the most important documents with my phone, then heard footsteps approaching. I slid the folder back into place and pretended to be examining the family photos on my father's bookshelf when my mother appeared in the doorway. "Alexandra, what are you doing in here?" Her voice carried a note of suspicion. I smiled innocently, just looking at old photos. I miss Grandma Martha so much sometimes. Mentioning my grandmother caused exactly the reaction I expected. Mom's face softened with guilt, and she ushered me back toward the living room without questioning me further. As we walked, I made a quick decision and whispered, "Mom, can I call my friend Jessica really quickly? I promised I'd let her know if it'd be available for brunch tomorrow." My mother, eager to get back to the manipulation session they had planned, nodded distractedly. "Make it quick, though. Your father wants to finalize things tonight." I stepped into my old bedroom, now converted to a guest room, and called Jessica, my best friend, since college, and the one person I trusted completely. She answered on the second ring. "Lex, aren't you at your parents' tonight?" I kept my voice low. "Jess, you're not going to believe what's happening." My voice cracked slightly as I quickly explained the situation. Jessica's outrage was immediate and validating. "Are you kidding me? They're trying to steal your inheritance for your deadbeat brother? After everything you've told me about how they favor him?" "I know," I whispered, "and I have evidence now that he's gambling and lying about his debts." "So what are you going to do?" Jessica asked. I took a deep breath. "I'm going to let them think considering it while I gather more information. But Jess, there's something I haven't told them yet, something Grandma Martha and I arranged before she died." Jessica gasped as I explained the rest. "Lex, you're a genius, or your grandmother was. Holy shit." For the first time since arriving at my parents' house, I smiled genuinely. "I have to go back before they get suspicious. I'll call you tomorrow with updates." After hanging up, I took a moment to compose myself. The pain of realizing my family saw me as nothing more than a financial resource was acute, but beneath it was a steely resolve. I wasn't the pushover. They clearly thought I was. When I returned to the living room, I adopted a slightly uncertain expression, letting them think their manipulation was working. "I think I understand the situation better now," I said carefully. "Andrew, these debts sound really overwhelming." My brother nodded eagerly, probably thinking I was about to agree to their scheme. "It's been really stressful, sis. I can hardly sleep at night." I highly doubted that, given the luxury watch and sports car, but I kept that thought to myself. "I just have a few more questions," I said. "When did these gambling debts start?" The room went completely silent. Mom's face drained of color, and Dad sat up straighter, his eyes narrowing. "What gambling debts?" Dad asked sharply. "We never mentioned gambling." I feigned confusion. "Oh, I just assumed, given the amount and the urgency, that there might be some less conventional debts involved. 250,000 is a lot for just business expenses." Andrew shifted uncomfortably. "It's not gambling. It's investments that didn't pay off." "Like cryptocurrency? Or sports betting?" I asked innocently. The flash of panic in his eyes told me I'd hit the mark. Mom jumped in quickly, trying to redirect the conversation again. "The nature of the debts isn't important, Alexandra," she said firmly. "What's important is that your brother needs help, and you're in a position to provide it." I nodded slowly. "You're right that family should help each other. I've always believed that. That's why I tried to help Andrew with his resume last year, and why I offered to look over his business plan for free." Dad sensed an opening. "Exactly. And this is just another way you can help." I paused, then asked the question I'd been holding back. Why didn't Grandma Martha leave anything to Andrew? Surely she would have wanted to help him too, if she knew he was in such trouble. The uncomfortable silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. Your grandmother had some old-fashioned ideas about money management, he said dismissively. She didn't understand the challenges of being an entrepreneur in today's economy. The way they disparaged my grandmother, who had been more financially savvy than all of them combined, made anger flare within me. But I kept my expression neutral, knowing the right moment to reveal what I knew hadn't yet arrived. So, what exactly are you asking me to do? Sign something? Transfer the inheritance when it comes through? I asked, pretending to consider their proposal. Mom brightened immediately, thinking she was making progress. The lawyer said you just need to sign a few documents redirecting the funds. We can help with all the paperwork. And if I do this, what happens next? Will Andrew get financial counseling? Start repaying the debts he already owes you? Andrew scoffed. I don't need counseling. I just need a fresh start. Dad placed a warning hand on his arm. What your brother means is that with this clean slate, he'll be able to be more responsible going forward. The lie hung in the air between us. I knew, and I suspected they knew I knew, that nothing would change. This would be another bailout in a long line of enabling behaviors. I just need some time to think about all this, I said finally. It's a big decision. The relief on their faces was palpable. They thought they had me on the hook. If only they knew what was coming. 6 months before this uncomfortable family meeting, I sat beside my grandmother's hospital bed, holding her frail hand as she dozed. The doctors had given her 3 months at most, though she would ultimately defy their expectations and live for almost 5 more. Martha had always been stubborn that way. When she opened her eyes, there was still that familiar sharpness in them, despite the medications and the pain. Alexandra, she said softly, I need to speak with you about something important. Alone. I glanced around the empty hospital room, confused. We are alone, Grandma. She smiled weakly. Good. I need you to call Franklin Patterson for me. Hez my attorney. His number is in my phone. The seriousness in her tone made me comply without question. I found the contact and dialed, putting the phone on speaker. Martha? A male voice answered. How are you feeling today? Like him dying, Franklin, my grandmother replied with her characteristic bluntness. But while my mind is still clear, I need to make some changes to my arrangements. I have Alexandra with me. She's the one I told you about. I was surprised by this. I'd never met Mr. Patterson, nor did I know my grandmother had discussed me with him. Mr. Patterson, professional but warm in his tone, said, Hello, Alexandra. Your grandmother speaks very highly of you. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. After some brief pleasantries, my grandmother got straight to the point. Franklin, I need to change how Alexandra receives her inheritance. I don't trust my son and his wife to respect my wishes once I'm gone. The directness of her statement shocked me. Grandma, Dad would never... She cut me off with a gentle squeeze of my hand. Listen to me, Alexandra. I love my son, but I know him. Hez always enabled your brother, and that's partly my fault for not being firmer when he was growing up. But what matters now is protecting what I've worked my entire life to build. Mr. Patterson spoke up. Martha, are you thinking about the trust option we discussed? Yes, she confirmed. I want everything moved into an irrevocable trust with Alexandra as the sole beneficiary. Can we make that happen quickly? We can, he assured her. I'll draw up the paperwork and bring it by tomorrow. What about the existing will? Let it stand, she said, surprising me again. Let them think that's still the plan. I finally found my voice. Grandma, I don't understand. What's going on? She looked at me with a mixture of love and sadness. Your parents have been asking me for money for Andrew's debts for years. I always refused because I knew it wouldn't help him in the long run. When I told them last month about my diagnosis, the first thing your father asked was how my estate would be divided. The revelation felt like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't believe my father would be so callous. I made the mistake of telling them I was leaving most of my estate to you, she continued. I saw the look they exchanged, and I knew right then they would try to take it from you. But Dad wouldn't, Mr. Patterson interrupted gently. I've been Martha's attorney for 30 years, Alexandra. Trust me when I say we've seen this pattern before with your brother. Your grandmother is being prudent, not paranoid. Over the next several weeks, as my grandmother's health fluctuated, I worked closely with Mr. Patterson to establish the trust. We transferred all of my grandmother's significant assets, property, investments, cash accounts, into an irrevocable trust with carefully structured terms. At first I felt tremendous guilt about the secrecy. These were my parents, after all. But each time I visited my grandmother, she would share another story about my father asking about her finances, or Andrew calling with some new emergency requiring funds. These conversations reinforced that her concerns were valid. The trust was designed with several important features. First, it was established while my grandmother was still alive, meaning the assets were already transferred before her death and would not go through probate. Second, it had specific provisions for how the money could be used, including my education, housing, and eventually my own children's education. Third, and most importantly, it contained explicit language that prevented any loans or gifts to my parents or brother without Mr. Patterson's approval as co-trustee. When we were setting up the trust, I had argued against such strict provisions. What if Andrew really does need help someday? I asked. Shouldn't I be able to decide that for myself? My grandmother had fixed me with her penetrating gaze. Alexandra, you have always had a tender heart, and that's beautiful. But I know my son and grandson. They will play on that tenderness until they've drained you dry. If Andrew truly changes and truly needs help, you can petition Franklin, and together you'll make a wise decision. This is protection, not punishment. Mr. Patterson had added, in my experience, if your brother genuinely reforms, having to go through a formal process to receive help will actually be beneficial to him. It will reinforce accountability. The day we finalized the trust, my grandmother seemed to gain a new energy. It's done, she said with satisfaction. Now I can focus on the time I have left without worrying about what comes after. The trust was kept completely confidential. As far as my parents knew, my grandmother's original will remained in effect, which left the bulk of her estate to me with small bequests to them and Andrew. The only people aware of the trust's existence were myself, Mr. Patterson, and his associate who had helped draft the documents. When my grandmother passed away 2 months later, I was devastated, but also grateful for the time Wed had to say goodbye properly. At the funeral, I noticed my father speaking intently with a man I later identified as Mr. Walters, the probate attorney who would handle the will. They seemed to think they were being subtle, but their frequent glances in my direction told me everything I needed to know. In the weeks that followed, I continued my charade of ignorance. When my father casually mentioned that there would be some paperwork for me to sign regarding Grandma's estate, I nodded without commitment. When Andrew suddenly started calling me regularly after years of minimal contact, I pretended not to notice the sudden interest in my life. Meanwhile, Mr. Patterson kept me updated on the background machinations. Your father has contacted me 3 times asking about the timeline for distributing assets, he told me during one of our calls. He seems particularly interested in liquid assets. And the trust? I asked anxiously. Is it secure? Absolutely ironclad, he assured me. Unless you choose to tell them about it, they have no way of accessing those assets. The will they think is governing the estate is essentially an empty shell. All major assets were transferred before your grandmother's death. To maintain the illusion, we allowed the probate process to proceed for the small amount of assets that remained outside the trust. This would give my parents and brother the impression that the process was moving forward normally, while the bulk of the inheritance was already safely secured. The trust arrangement wasn't just about protecting the money, it was about honoring my grandmother's wishes and the values she had instilled in me. She hadn't worked her entire life, saving carefully and investing wisely, only to have her legacy squandered on Andrew's gambling debts and luxury purchases. The hardest part was keeping this secret from my family. Despite their flaws, I loved them. Each time I considered coming clean, I remembered my grandmother's words, "They'll drain you dry." And so I maintained the pretense, waiting to see how far they would go. When my father's text arrived requesting the family meeting, I knew the moment of truth was approaching. I'd spent 6 months preparing for this confrontation, but that didn't make it any easier. The realization that my parents saw me as nothing more than a solution to Andrew's problems was heartbreaking. But as I sat in my childhood bedroom after speaking with Jessica, I felt a strange sense of calm. My grandmother had seen this coming and had given me the tools to protect myself. Now it was time to use them. I returned to the living room with a new resolve, finding my family exactly as I'd left them. Dad looking businesslike, Mom anxious, and Andrew trying and failing to hide his anticipation. They had clearly been discussing how best to handle me while I was gone. "I think I understand the situation better now," I said, taking my seat again. The relief on their faces was immediate. Mom reached over to squeeze my hand. "I knew you'd understand, sweetheart. Family has to stick together." I nodded slowly. Family is important. Grandma Martha taught me that. At the mention of my grandmother, a flicker of discomfort crossed my father's face, but he quickly recovered. "Your grandmother would want what's best for all of us," he said confidently. I decided to play along a little longer. "So, what exactly are the next steps here? I assume you have some paperwork ready?" Dad brightened visibly. "Yes, actually. Mr. Walters provided some forms. They just need your signature, and then when the estate clears probate, the funds will go directly to pay off Andrew's obligations." The casual way he discussed redirecting my inheritance still stunned me, but I maintained my composure. And how soon would this happen? "The probate should be complete within the next few weeks," Dad explained. "Mr. Walters says it's moving along smoothly." Andrew, unable to contain himself any longer, jumped in. "This is such a relief, sis. I already put a deposit down on a commercial space for my next venture. It's going to be big this time, I can feel it." His statement confirmed my suspicions. He wasn't just planning to pay off existing debts, he was already spending money he didn't have, counting on my inheritance. "You put a deposit down?" I asked, feigning confusion. "But I thought you were in financial trouble?" Mom shot him a warning look, but Andrew just shrugged. "I had to move fast on this opportunity. Once this debt stuff is cleared up, it'll be back on track." Dad tried to redirect the conversation. "Perhaps we should sign those papers now. While we're all together." He reached for his briefcase beside the couch. It was time. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Before we do that, there's something you all should know," I said calmly. 3 pairs of eyes fixed on me with varying degrees of wariness. "I had a private conversation with Grandma Martha before she died," I continued, "about her estate and her wishes." Dad frowned. "Whatever she told you, the will is clear. And as executors, your mother and I—" "There's no money in the estate," I interrupted quietly. The statement hung in the air for a long moment before Mom found her voice. What do you mean, no money? That's ridiculous. Your grandmother was quite well off. I maintained eye contact with my father, who was beginning to look distinctly uncomfortable. 6 months before she died, Grandma transferred all her major assets into an irrevocable trust. The will you're so eager to execute is essentially empty. Andrew's face contorted with anger. That's bullshit, he exploded. Grandma had money. She owned her house, she had investments. All in the trust, I confirmed. Mr. Patterson helped her set it up specifically to prevent what you're trying to do right now. Dad's expression darkened dangerously. You're lying. We would have known about this. Would you? I asked quietly. When was the last time any of you actually visited Grandma without asking for money? When did you last spend time with her because you wanted to, not because you wanted something from her? Mom began to cry, but I noticed the tears seemed more frustrated than sorrowful. This is so unfair, she sobbed. We're your family. That money should help all of us. The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. If I hadn't been prepared, they'd have taken everything without a second thought, and now they were claiming unfairness. Dad shifted to intimidation, his voice dropping to the tone he used when I was a teenager in trouble. Alexandra, whatever game you're playing needs to stop right now. Your brother needs this money. If you're trying to negotiate for a portion, just say so. I almost laughed at how completely he misunderstood the situation. I'm not negotiating. I'm informing you that the assets you're trying to access don't exist in the estate. They're in a trust with me as the beneficiary. Andrew jumped to his feet. She's lying! She has to be! His face had turned an alarming shade of red. You spoiled, selfish bitch! You've always thought you were better than me? Andrew! Mom gasped, but there was little conviction in her admonishment. Dad tried a different approach, his tone softening to the one he used when trying to convince me to let Andrew borrow my car in high school. Alexandra, honey, if what you're saying is true, and am not saying I believe it, we can work with this trust. You can still help your brother. That's what your grandmother would want. The manipulation was so transparent, it almost felt insulting. Grandma specifically set up the trust because she knew you'd try to take the money for Andrew, I said calmly. She told me you'd been asking her for years to bail him out. Mom's tears stopped abruptly. That old woman never understood Andrew's potential, she said, her voice suddenly hard. She was always playing favorites with you. The mask had finally dropped completely. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen a few times. Did you know that Virginia is a one-party consent state for recordings? I asked conversationally. That means only one person in a conversation needs to consent to being recorded. The blood drained from my father's face. You haven't been recording this? I smiled without humor. From the moment I walked in, every word about taking my inheritance, Andrew's gambling debts that you tried to hide, the commercial space he already put a deposit on counting on money that isn't his everything. Dad stood up abruptly. Give me that phone, he demanded. I stood my ground. Number. And, before you get any ideas, the recording is already backed up to the cloud. Jessica has access, as does Mr. Patterson. Mom was looking at me like she'd never seen me before. How could you do this to your own family? She whispered. The hypocrisy was staggering. How could I? You were literally planning to steal my inheritance. I finally allowed some of my anger to show. You didn't even ask me, you decided. As if I have no say in what happens with what Grandma left me. Andrew, still red-faced and now pacing, pointed at me accusingly. You think you're so perfect with your fancy financial advisor job and your responsible lifestyle. You have no idea what it's like to struggle. I laughed without humor. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, while you failed out of the private university Mom and Dad paid for. I saved for years to buy my condo while you expected them to bail you out every time you made a bad decision. Don't talk to me about struggle. Dad tried one more angle. If you expose this recording, you'll destroy this family, he said gravely. Is that what you want? I wasn't falling for the guilt trip. I'm not planning to expose anything unless you force my hand. All I want is for you to stop trying to take what's rightfully mine. Mom stood up, straightening her shoulders. This isn't over, Alexandra. There are ways around trusts. We can contest this. I remained calm. The trust was established while Grandma was of sound mind, with medical documentation to prove it. It was completed 6 months before her death. It's ironclad, and Mr. Patterson is one of the best trust attorneys in the state. But by all means, waste your money on legal fees trying to break it. You're no longer part of this family, Andrew spat venomously. As far as I'm concerned, you're dead to us. The words hurt more than I wanted to admit, but I kept my expression neutral. That's your choice, Andrew. But consider this. I'm the only one in this room who hasn't tried to steal from family members. I picked up my purse and jacket, suddenly eager to be anywhere but there. For what it's worth, I would have considered helping you if you'd been honest and actually asked, instead of trying to manipulate me. But that bridge is burned now. Dad made one final attempt to block my path to the door. Alexandra, don't leave like this. We can talk about this rationally. I stepped around him. There's nothing more to say. The money is in the trust. It stays in the trust. And maybe someday, when you're all ready to have a relationship that isn't based on what you can get from me, we can talk again. As I walked out the door, I heard my mother's tearful voice. What will we tell people? Even in that moment, her concern was for appearances, not for the relationship Shed just damaged beyond repair. I got into my car, hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to ebb. As I pulled away from the house I'd grown up in, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, sadness for what I'd lost, anger at their betrayal, but also an unexpected sense of liberation. For the first time in my life, I was completely free of their manipulation. My grandmother had given me more than just a financial inheritance. She'd given me the strength to stand up for myself and the wisdom to recognize when relationships had become toxic, even when those relationships were with family. The weeks following that explosive family meeting were some of the most emotionally turbulent of my life. Despite knowing I'd done the right thing, the estrangement from my family left a void that physical distance hadn't prepared me for. There were moments when I questioned everything, wondering if I should have found some middle ground, some way to maintain family ties while protecting myself. But each time my phone lit up with a text from my parents those first few weeks, it wasn't to apologize or seek understanding. It was another attempt at manipulation. Your brother is devastated. Dad is having chest pains from the stress. How can you do this to us? Each message confirmed I'd made the necessary choice, painful as it was. Jessica became my rock during this time. She cleared her schedule the weekend after the confrontation, showing up at my door with comfort food, wine, and a willingness to listen as I processed everything. We had been friends since freshman year of college, back when I was still trying to please my parents while establishing my independence. She had witnessed the pattern of my family's behavior for over a decade. You did what you had to do, Lex, she assured me as we sat on my balcony, watching the sunset over the city skyline. Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing when she set up that trust. She was protecting you because she loved you. But they're my family, I said, voicing the doubt that kept me awake at night. Aren't we supposed to help family no matter what? Jessica shook her head firmly. Family doesn't try to steal from you. Family doesn't favor one child while exploiting another. What they did wasn't love, it was opportunism. Her words were harsh, but resonated with truth. Over time, I began to build what therapists call a chosen family, a network of people who genuinely cared about my well-being without conditions or expectations. Through Mr. Patterson, I was surprised to discover I wasn't the only one who had experienced my family's financial manipulation. My cousin Elaine reached out after hearing about our confrontation, sharing her own story of how my parents had borrowed money for Andrew's college fund and never repaid it. My Aunt Susan, my father's sister, who had always been told was estranged because she was difficult, contacted me with a similar story of financial exploitation. Finding these connections helped heal some of the isolation I felt. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't crazy for establishing boundaries. 3 months after the confrontation, I made a decision that honored my grandmother's legacy in a way I knew would make her proud. I established the Martha Williams Financial Literacy Foundation, using a portion of my inheritance to create educational programs for young adults. The foundation focused particularly on teaching healthy financial boundaries in relationships, something my grandmother had tried to instill in me from an early age. Using my professional skills as a financial advisor, I developed curricula that combined practical money management with the emotional intelligence needed to recognize and resist financial manipulation. Each time a student shared a story of setting healthy boundaries or making their first investment, I felt my grandmother's presence and approval. My healing journey also included therapy, where I worked through the complex grief of losing not just my grandmother, but my immediate family as well. My therapist helped me understand that my parents' treatment of me wasn't a reflection of my worth, but of their own unhealthy patterns. "You can't change them," Dr. Harper told me during one particularly difficult session. "You can only change how you respond to them. And sometimes the healthiest response is distance." Despite this wisdom, 6 months after our confrontation, I made one final attempt to reach out to Andrew. Not with money, but with something I thought might be more valuable, my professional expertise. I sent him an email offering to provide free financial counseling to help him develop a sustainable budget and debt repayment plan. I made it clear that I wasn't offering funds, but rather the tools to manage his own finances better. His response was brief and cutting. "Unless you're offering actual help, don't bother contacting me again. Your advice is worthless to me." That exchange, though painful, provided a kind of closure. Id extended an olive branch that offered real help rather than enabling, and Head rejected it. I could move forward knowing Id tried. Nearly a year after the confrontation, my phone rang with my parents' number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to take the call. "Alexandra?" My mother's voice sounded smaller somehow, less confident than I remembered. "We need to talk." The conversation that followed was revealing, though not in the way I might have hoped. Their financial situation had deteriorated. Andrew's latest venture had failed spectacularly, leaving them on the hook for loans they'd co-signed. They weren't calling to apologize or rebuild our relationship, they were calling because they needed money. "I know we've had our differences," Mom said, carefully avoiding any mention of their attempted theft, "but we're still family, and family helps each other through difficult times." The irony of her using the exact same language as before wasn't lost on me. But this time, I was prepared. "I'm happy to help you find a good financial counselor," I offered, "and I can recommend some resources for debt management, but I won't be providing funds." Dad took the phone then, his tone oscillating between anger and forced pleasantness. "This isn't about counseling, Alexandra. We need actual help. Surely that trust of yours has plenty to spare." I held firm to my boundaries. "I'm sorry you're in this situation, but I can't give you money. That would just be continuing the cycle that's gotten Andrew to this point. The call ended with my father calling me selfish and heartless words that once would have devastated me, but now simply confirmed I was making the right choice. As difficult as these experiences were, they taught me lessons about family, money, and self-worth that have shaped who I am today. I learned that true family supports your growth and respects your boundaries. I learned that financial independence isn't just about having enough money. It's about having the strength to say no when necessary. And most importantly, I learned that my value isn't determined by what I can provide to others, but by the integrity with which I live my life. My grandmother once told me, "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no." At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. Now I do. Today, I live a life that I believe would make her proud. The trust she established has allowed me to not only secure my own future, but to help others through the foundation. I've developed deep, meaningful friendships that provide the emotional support family should, and I've learned to define family not by blood, but by mutual respect and genuine care. To those of you watching who might be struggling with similar situations, remember that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. Financial manipulation within families is more common than many realize, and recognizing it is the first step toward breaking the cycle. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members over money? What helped you stay strong in your decision? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content like this. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect themselves, even from family. Thank you for watching. And remember what my grandmother taught me. Your worth isn't measured by what you give to those who take, but by the boundaries you set to protect your peace.